Springtime on the northern Italian coast. The mimosas, they are blooming. The pavement tables, they're filling up. The winter snows, receding. And in the hills overlooking the sea, Slovenian cycling is coming to the boil.
Eccolo qua, e hai notato bene Marco, hai notato bene, il primo colpo è quello di Pogačar, non ha perso un degli altri per rischiare tutto in discesa. E cosa ha rischiato qua Matej Mohoric, che è uscito dall'asfalto, si è infilato nella canalina laterale, ha fatto un numero.
Yes, that was the sound of Slovenian duo Tadej Pogačar, Matej Mohoric cutting a swathe through the peloton in the fulminating finish to the 2022 Milan-San Remo. Long-winded, slow-burning, but less about Jeremy. Ultimately, so very dramatic. This year's race stayed true to form and packed all the thrills into the final half hour. My name's OJ Borg. Welcome along to this Aérogramme from Peloton magazine. Thank you for joining us. And over the next 40 minutes or so, as we dissect Mohoric's scintillating success, I'm joined by the Prince of the Pyrenees, award-winning author Peter Cossins, just down the last of his wine, and the press pack's answer to Patrick Lefevere, Tour de France correspondent to The Guardian, Jeremy Whittle. And Jeremy, a new season is upon us. Is that dark heart of yours, is there a flutter of hope for the excitement there is to come?
I think it's already been really exciting, and I think what's really stunned me is that, as Pete will testify, because he was at most of these races, the season starts at the end of January now. It's crazy. Even post-pandemic, maybe because of the pandemic, it feels like there's even greater urgency for riders to get results even sooner in the year. And I mean, Milan-San Remo now feels, because I've been watching all these races on TV since the end of January, it feels like it's the middle of the season already. I don't know if you feel that way, Pete, as well.
Yeah, it does feel like we're a long way in. I mean, normally, traditionally, I suppose San Remo would be almost the start of the season. I mean, there would have been races before it, but you kind of always have this almost evocative build up to it, and then you have this moment where the riders come out of the Turquino and they kind of pass from winter and they come down onto the Ligurian coast, and it's spring, and that's kind of almost like the season started. But I mean, we've been going. I mean, I've been going to races since early February, and it's even a couple of weeks before that they were at it in Mallorca. So we've seen plenty of racing already.
You've been to, as Jeremy said, Pete, you've been to a lot of races already this season. What's it like on the ground? Are we back to pre-pandemic? Are you allowed to get up and huff on the face of the cyclist, or are they still keeping you away?
No, it's it was bizarre actually. The first race I went to, the Étoile de Bessèges, which is a very small race, kind of in the Gard region, just north of Nîmes, basically, not far from Marseille. I went to the mix zone on the first day, expecting just to kind of speak to riders there, and spoke to a couple of journalists. They're like, "Oh no, you can go around the buses. You can talk to anyone you want." And it was just, I mean, at that point, you were still supposed to be wearing masks, but pretty much everybody in the race organisation was maskless. I mean, and it's continued like that. It was Tour de la Provence I've done. Paris-Nice was a little bit stricter, but still you were allowed to go around the buses. It's almost like we've gone back to the old times before COVID.
But you got ill, didn't you? You've actually been ill, Pete, from one of the races from Paris-Nice.
Yeah, I got the... I don't know who gave it to me. I got the bug that everybody's been going down with. That resulted in 60 riders only finishing Paris-Nice out of 150-odd starters. And, I mean, it wasn't COVID. I was testing. I was doing lateral flow tests, nothing. And all the riders were as well. So it wasn't COVID. We know it wasn't. It was just some pretty vicious chest infection. I think it's interesting because I remember reading probably a couple of years ago now about the fact that we've all been under restrictions, we've been in lockdown, that because we're not interacting with each other in the way that we would have been, these bugs that would have you wouldn't even have noticed them normally, now when we're getting them, they're affecting us much more severely. And I think that's what's happened in cycling in the last couple of weeks. It was at Tirreno as well.
Well, I'm going to come to this a little bit later on when we talk about a certain team, because I've got a theory now that the better a team's isolation protocols have been, that means they're going to be affected more now. They're actually interacting with people again. But we'll come to that later on, because let's talk about what we're here to talk about. And that is the 113th Milan-San Remo, first of the monuments, all 293 kilometres of it. Jeremy, was it a vintage Primavera?
I kind of think it was, because we had such a scintillating finish, as we said, fulminating, scintillating, but it was really thrilling. I mean, as ever, it was kind of the kind of race where if you fell asleep after 150k and woke up with 250k with 50k left, it didn't really matter, if I'm honest, because you didn't really miss that much. There was the odd tumble and so on and so forth, and the breakaway just kept going. But it all came down to the 2 final climbs. It was totally traditional in that respect. What was different, I think, this year was that the penny seems to have dropped for everybody now that attacking on the Poggio is no longer enough. So you have to either do an incredibly fierce pace on the penultimate climb, the Cipressa, and in the hope that that will shed the group that goes up the Poggio, so it makes attacking more likely to succeed. Or, as Mohoric demonstrated, you just stack everything on going bonkers on the descent. And what we got was, I don't think I've ever seen a descent quite like that, maybe a couple of times in races.
It was outrageous. It was an outrageous descent. It was a, I'm going to go and risk. Well, it was, he was risking his career, wasn't he, at times, the way he was going around these corners, bunny hopping out of gutters. It was a, if you want to win it, come on. It
was right on the edge, and it was brilliant to watch because the level of skill and expertise was phenomenal. And I mean, we'll talk more about that later on as well, because we'll talk about the element of drafting that seemed to go on a bit, which is one of the things he's been accused of using the motorbikes too much, and that's become an issue. But all of that aside, I mean, he was too good. He was too good for the motorbikes. Even on the straights, he was catching the motorbikes. They were gunning it away from him on the bends, but he was just so phenomenally quick. And we'll talk also about this the seat post as well that he had, because it was obviously very, very carefully calculated and well rehearsed, and it worked brilliantly.
Spring riding, it is back, and Hammerhead's Karoo 2 is the only bike computer with predictive path technology to help you get more out of your rides. And I know this because I have one, and it's wonderful. Explore with confidence with the most advanced GPS navigation and routing available, and its exclusive climber feature to see upcoming gradient changes in real time. And if it's a big change, you can weep onto its waterproof skin. Get your Karoo 2 today at hammerhead.io. Use promo code Aérogramme, that's Aero, A-E-R-O, Gram with 2 M's and an E, to get a free custom colour kit and exclusive premium water bottle when you purchase a Karoo 2. That's hammerhead.io, promo code Aérogramme. Or if I was going to say it as it's written, Aérogramme. Now, I'm not normally a fan of Milan-San Remo. I have said in the past, and I still almost felt it until I watched this most recent one, that if they were going to get rid of a monument to bring in Strada Bianchi, this is the one that I would lose. I find it boring, I find it predictable, always have done. But because of Pogacar, because he came out and said, I'm going to attack here, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to try and make the race happen, for me, it added this sense of just enthrallment. I was ready for it. I watched the last 150k and I was ready for anything to happen. I mean, I know it became predictable-ish at the end formulaic, but because he said what he said, and because he has the ability and seems to have made it happen over the past few races where he said, I'm going to attack, I felt, Pete, like the race was electric. They were watching him. They were expecting something. People were trying things and not leaving it till the end.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think another factor that was important was the fact that 2 or 3 days before the race, Mathieu van der Poel decided that he was going to join in the action as well. And
I know, he's been on a sofa for weeks.
I know, and you just think, I mean, he obviously wasn't going to race San Remo and just to get 300 Ks in his legs. He was going to race it to win it, because that's the kind of rider he is. And I mean, we keep coming back to this thing. I mean, we talked about it last year and even the year before. There just seemed to be a big change in the ethos of racing now, in the style of racing. Everybody's full on. I was talking to Matt White about it last week, actually, the director at Bike Exchange, and he was saying you can't turn up at a race now and just think, oh, I'm going to ride this for training or whatever, and I'll peak in 6 weeks' time. He said every race is just flat out racing. If you're not ready for it, you're not going to go anywhere. And I mean, Pogacar coming in there obviously added an extra element to it. He'd won his previous 2 monuments at Liège and Lombardy, and you thought, can he really win it? Well, better watch and see whether he does.
Those multiple attacks, though, going up the Poggio, they were brilliant to see, Jeremy. I mean, I enjoyed that, and he almost made it work after the fierce pace that his team put down.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because for years and years there was this kind of X marks the spot. I mean, was almost, there was a spot on the Poggio where everybody attacked successfully, and for years and years, all through the 90s, even through into the early noughties, that was kind of where you would go. Maurizio Fondriest did it, Laurent Fignon did it, I think many other riders as well, and that's not the case anymore. And people saying it wasn't steep enough for Pogačar, but I think he'd been ill between Tirreno Adriatico finishing and Milan San Remo. He was sick with a cold. He said it hadn't affected him that badly, but I mean, maybe he was slightly blunted by that. But it was, and they obviously knew it was coming.
Yeah, and that's what made it exciting. And Van Aert managed to cover them all. In the end, it was Søren Kragh Andersen who almost took everyone by surprise and got over the top. That seemed to be the attack that did the most damage.
I think Pogačar said afterwards, didn't he, that he'd actually attacked too early on the climb, that he attacked twice early on into the headwind, and that kind of enabled everybody to get quickly back on his wheel. And so that his final two attacks weren't as strong as the first two. He didn't have as much left. And I guess it's just that thing. I mean, he'd ridden San Remo once before, finished 12th a couple of years ago. But it's just that thing of experience, of knowing that climb and knowing where the wind's coming from, having that experience of when to attack. And he just got it wrong.
Is it overconfidence? Because, I mean, everything he has touched. I was talking before about his win statistics today. Have you seen these? I mean, they've been tweeted out a fair amount. I mean, how much he's won. 37 career wins, which is equal with Alaphilippe. 75% of those wins are World Tour. He's won 8 of his last 9 stage races. 10 of the last 16 stage races he's started as a pro. He's been top 10 in 15 of those 16 stage races. He's never DNF'd a UCI stage race in any category, so 36 in total. I mean, is there a chance that he's going to be overconfident?
No, well, I mean, you can afford to be overconfident if you're that successful, can't you? I mean, cycling's been characterised by riders who've rarely in the classics, but riders who've been in the number of races they've entered have been phenomenally successful. You think of Eddie Merckx, obviously, Bernardino. There's been others as well. But the number of riders who've combined Grand Tour success or success in the 3 major tours of Italy, France and Spain, and allied that to success in one-day races, that's even rarer. So I think it's going to be harder for him to win one-day races than it is stage races, because he can put together such a dominant performance in a 3-week race, because he can do really well in time trials, kill them in the mountains, and then that builds up into a bigger and bigger lead over time. But in a one-day race, as we saw, it's not that straightforward. I mean, Strade Bianche was a one-off. I don't know if he'll ever see that happen again in his career. But he's obviously capable of winning all these
it made
races.
It exciting for me. Anyway, let's not talk about the people who didn't win. Let's talk about the man who won. It's not the first time somebody has won descending off the top of the Poggio. In 2018, when Vincenzo Nibali attacked on the way down and held off the chasers to win almost by the same distance as Mohoric. Pete, take us through that descending technique. We've mentioned it before. I mean, I was trying to deal with the kids at the same time, and I just kept turning around and seeing his bike buckling all over the place. He almost put it into a wall. He bunny hopped out of a gutter as well. I mean, the technique was amazing, but it was high risk.
It was, yeah. I mean, it was. Well, I mean, it was just crazy watching it. I mean, you almost had to watch it between your fingers, because it was that frightening. You just thought, he's going to stack this in a minute. He's going to go flying over the edge. I mean, we've seen some bad crashes before on coming down the Poggio, and I just thought he was all over the place. But I mean, I guess in the right way. He did seem like he was in control most of the time. I mean, that one moment where he ended up in the gutter. I mean, we're going to talk about the dropper seat, but I read one comment on Twitter from somebody saying that he was actually checking just before he ended up in the gutter. He actually kind of looks between his legs, and sometimes it can be you kind of checking on the riders behind you where you were. But somebody said it was actually looked like he was looking between his legs to see whether the seat had dropped or not.
Yeah.
And that
I've seen that. I've seen someone clip that, and you actually see the seat pop back up.
Oh right, okay. So he's just checking that. And so when he looks back up again, he's in the gutter, kind of hurtling towards the wall. He just bunny hops himself out of it.
But did the other thing about that? Did you see that Pogačar was?
I mean, Pogačar was.
Mohoric,
I think, went over in about 5th place
because he thought he was going to come down
over the top of the Poggio, because there were 4 or 5 guys. You mentioned Søren Kragh, and Van Aert was there, Van der Poel was there. Obviously, Pogačar was there, and then suddenly Mohoric comes out of nowhere. get to the first hairpin, and he kind of cuts inside Pogačar, who was on the front, and he'd said to him during the race, "Look, I've got this dropper seat on. I'm going to go crazy down the Poggio. Don't bother. Don't try and follow me because you'll kill yourself, basically." And
he'd said that. That's such good kidology.
He'd said that to loads of people apparently, and he was going around the bunch saying, "Look, I've got this dropper seat. This is gonna make all the difference if we get to the Poggio."
He's a confident boy, isn't he? He's not. He's not,
very, very smart as well. I think
he
knew what he was doing. He was kind of psyching people out, and of course he's got this reputation from before for being a mad descender, for want of a better term, from a Mohoric position where you kind of get over your top tube, which is now been banned, of course. So
did he in inverted commas invented the super tuck? Didn't he?
I think that was the first time it was seen was in the under-23 road race that I think he won it, didn't he? I can't remember back then now.
You know what though, but with this the whole super tuck thing. Okay, I remember watching Marco Pantani descending. You will both remember that. Well, you will certainly, Pete. OJ might be a little too young, but and he used to descend with his butt cheeks over the rear wheel. So he used to have his abdomen on the stomach, his belly button on the saddle rather, his stomach on the saddle, his arms outstretched in front of him, and his bum over the back wheel. And he went down the Von2, the Northside Von2, in 1994, the 94 tour. Then that was the first time I'd ever seen.
You talked about Pantani there. I mean,
when I used to race a mountain bike on the saddle,
when you were descending, you used to put your backside out over your back wheel. That's how you kind of stayed in control going downhill. So I mean, Pantani he was just using mountain bike technique back then, like 30 years ago or whatever. And Mohoric has just done the same now. I mean, the UCI have said it's legal. Whether it's... I mean, I guess it's for the riders to decide. I mean, Pogačar took the decision, quite clearly took the decision. You could almost see it going through his mind, thinking, I'm not going to do this. I'll let somebody else chase. And he said that afterwards. And seeing it initially, I thought, has he pulled over because Mohoric is another Slovenian? And he's just thought, I'm going to let him go. But I don't think he did do that. I mean, his team had worked for him. He wouldn't have given the race up that easily. I think he just thought, this is mad. I'm not going to do this. I've got to try and win the Tour de France in three months' time. And Mohoric hasn't.
Now, not everyone can use these dropper seat posts. As these things tend to happen, they become picked up by other teams. They try to use the different techniques. Not every team can use these dropper posts, can they, Pete?
No, I mean, it's interesting. I was doing a bit of reading today, and the Bahrain team, they use two basic road bikes. They've got a Reacto frame, which is kind of sculpted, it's aerodynamic and whatever, and that's the one that Mohoric usually races on. And they have a more kind of all-round mountain bike, the Sculptura, which has got circular tubing. And of course, for these dropper posts, you need they're circular. You need circular tubing to insert them. So he was able to use this Sculptura's frame, drop the dropper post in, and have it fitted. Whereas most other teams couldn't do that. I mean, maybe they have a circular frame version as well. But I mean, Bahrain went into this with this plan. They picked this frame, and they also knew. Mohoric was going to obviously take good advantage of it. He's a great descender, but they also knew about Mohoric that he's fantastic in really long races. And so this was they've been planning this for months, and they knew that this was their big chance. They were going to have one chance, and this was it.
Yes, yeah. Did you know his Grand Tour stage wins have all been in the longest stage of the races that he's won the stages in? So his Vuelta stage win was the longest stage of that year's race. His Giro stage win was the longest stage of that year's race, and one of his two Tour stage wins was the longest stage as well. So he's got form for, like, you know, his Strava said 300k yesterday. I mean, he's obviously at his best.
I mean, what was interesting was when they came down off the Poggio, and he was actually racing in San Remo. God knows what size gear he was on. It looked like his legs were barely moving, but it was obviously going like the clappers. And you could see that they were never going to catch him. I mean, he's a great time trialist, but I mean, we saw in the Tour twice last year that if you give him give him a bit of ground in a break, you're never going to see him again.
Now, there were some big losers on the Via Roma. Ineos Grenadiers didn't have a top 10 finisher, nor did Quickstep, Movistar, EF Education, Lotto. A lot of teams you'd expect to be players, or at least be there or thereabout, didn't really show up. Jeremy, why was that?
Well, obviously with Quickstep, they didn't have Julien Alaphilippe because he was ill. He's had bronchitis after Tirreno-Adriatico. I mean, he took that very hard hit in Strade Bianche, and he'd actually been ill before that as well.
It was crazy, that crash.
It was, wasn't it? Most extraordinary crash. But so kind of, I think, it was a cumulative effect of him being battered and sick. So he wasn't there, so that kind of blunted their edge. Fabio Jakobsen, their sprinter of choice for this race, didn't figure. I think he was blown out on Cipressa by the pace.
And it was a fast race. I mean, the whole race was fast. What was it, 45 kilometres in the end?
Yeah, it was. I think it was the fastest Milan-San Remo of this century, anyway,
wow.
and compared with kind of like the fastest ones of the last century as well. Ineos just sums up their season, really. I mean, it's very hot and cold, and Tom Pidcock was sick. He had a stomach problem. Filippo Ganna just dropped back.
Kwiatkowski got caught in a crash at the top, didn't he? Just as the attack came over.
Yeah, and he was their best finisher. I think he was 17th, and they just kind of never really seemed to get a grip on the race at any point. Movistar, well, you wouldn't expect that much, perhaps, but they've had some good performances already this year. EF, maybe a bit more. You'd have thought they'd get a rider anywhere around the top 10. And Lotto, obviously,
I think Valgren was caught up in that crash with Kwiatkowski as well. Actually, that's why he was
right.
And obviously, they had Magnus Cort had to pull out just before the race, so they were scuppered by illness as well.
And then Lotto, obviously, they had high hopes for Philippe Gilbert, and he wasn't there. And obviously with Caleb Ewan absent as well. So there were a lot of people that you'd normally expect to be in a top 10, top 15, or coming into the finish with a chance of winning, just weren't even in the race in the first place. So you're looking around. I mean, that makes me wonder, why was Mate Mohoric not more favoured? Because if you look at that race and you look at his skills, he's actually quite an obvious choice. But I mean, I heard no talk of him as a potential winner beforehand.
Because I think when you've got Van Aert and you've got Pogačar in a race, I think they're blinding lights. I think which is good for the other riders, because I think they get blinded to what other people can do, because they take up so many column inches for good reason. They're so great. Just a word on Ineos then, because they didn't have anyone in the top 17. It hasn't been the greatest start to the season. They are one of the big three teams, well funded. They've got this great pedigree behind them. If we look ahead to the Grand Tours, Pete, who do they? I mean, with what's happened to Bernal, and we're glad he's back riding the bike again. We're glad. Is he back on the bike?
I've seen him on a home trainer. Yeah,
he's on a home trainer. But obviously he's not going to be racing the Grand Tours this year. What does the rest of their season look like?
Well, I think they're going to put a lot of emphasis on the Giro, and Carapaz is still going for that. I mean, he crashed at the Étoile de Bessèges, first race of the season. He kind of struggled since then, I think. But I mean, the Giro looks a pretty open race. I mean, it looks like a race that they can definitely win, because none of the other big guys, the riders that you've mentioned, are going to be there. So, and he's obviously won it before, so that looks like a big moment in their season. I mean, looking ahead to the Tour, I mean, Danny Martinez has been going really well. He rode really strongly at Paris-Nice. He probably looks like the most informed Grand Tour rider. He was better than Adam Yates at Paris-Nice. So potentially he could lead the team. But I mean, he's not. You wouldn't have thought he's going to beat Pogačar or Roglic, or maybe one or two other the Grand Tour contenders. So
I mean, this is outrageous for a team of the size and budget of Ineos, that we're talking about people who might or might not be able to do something, Jeremy.
I mean, it is. It does feel like they've been left behind. We keep saying they're regrouping. Now it's starting to feel like they're off the pace a bit. And obviously, every team has mishaps. Every team has illness, crashes, and as you say, thank God that Egan Bernal is okay. And he was seriously injured, but he looks like he may be able to resume his career, which is fantastic. But it feels like they haven't really got. They're more looking for opportunities. Crumbs from the table. I mean, it's roles reversed, because they used to be the team that other teams couldn't beat. They had a roster that other teams couldn't contend with. So other teams would be scrappy around for the the combativity prize or the King of the Mountains or stage wins, while Ineos ruled the roost on the GC in every stage race. It's reversed now. I mean, I think Martinez is a terrific rider. He was always very good at EF when he came through there. He's a great time trialist. I can see him being on the podium in one of the 3 Grand Tours, absolutely. I can't see him winning at the moment. I can't see Carapaz beating Roglic or Pogačar. I mean, which is why everything for them is probably stacked on the Giro, because other than that, it's hard to see what else they're going to have a hope in.
Geraint Thomas, I mean, they do still have Grand Tour winners within their ranks. Thomas, or is he too old now?
I think his time's gone.
I think the thing is with Thomas, if everything comes right like it did in 2018 for him, then yeah, he could challenge for the podium at the Tour, but it just doesn't come right for him all the time, very often, and to beat Pogačar, he's going to have to be better than he was in 2018. You can't see that happening now that he's 35, 36.
Well, not just Pogačar, it's got to be Roglic as well.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. They've always said, we've heard Sir Dave Brailsford talk about it before, that they're now going to have to race more excitingly, and they're going to have to because they can't control these races. We do love a bit of beef. Everyone loves beef, especially when it's beef against things which aren't other human beings, because we've seen media motorbikes close to riders for many years, particularly in Milan-San Remo. Michael Matthews, Jeremy, has been very upset about it, hasn't he?
Yeah, he said he seemed to suggest that that they'd had a dramatic impact on the race, and he said afterwards that Matej Mohoric significantly benefited from drafting behind the motorbike. And when you're watching the race, you could see there were a couple of moments where Mohoric did catch up with the bikes on a descent, and then the motorbike would gun away from the hairpin bend, being just in front of Mohoric, and Mohoric was able to jump on that hole in the air and slipstream just for a couple of seconds. This is what he said after the race.
Yeah, it was definitely much faster on the suppressor than other years. As we expected, UAE wanted to make it a hard final to, I think, eliminate everyone's teammates, so it couldn't come down to a bunch sprint, and they seemed to do that. I think they got a group of 30 of us over the suppressor, and then on the Poggio, Tadej just continued to attack, but I think the wind didn't favour him too much, and we could all pretty much stay there. So, and I think Mohoric went on the descent, and I think whoever was on the wheel let the wheel go, and he got a gap, and then the motorbikes dragged him away. So, for me it was more just sort of let the big favourites fight it out, and then see what I can do in the final.
Yeah, look, it's an ongoing issue. If you look back at cycling in the last 20 years, if you pull out of Milan-San Remo 20 years ago, guys were attacking into the motorbikes, and there was a cavalcade of motorbikes on the Poggio. It was ridiculous. But it has improved. But at the end of the day, we're a lot more educated than we are now. GCN did a really good survey or study on the effect of a motorbike at 5 metres and 10 metres in front of a single rider. And it was ridiculous. It was 15% at 5 metres and still 10 or 12% at 10 metres. Now, if you look at how often motorbikes are within 5 metres, let alone 10 metres of a chasing peloton, of yesterday's winner Mohoric yesterday on the descent of the Poggio, and even at 10% for 5 seconds, that's enough to get speed back up again. It's a big difference. So there's a couple of factors. One is for me is a safety issue. How safe is it having a motorbike 5 to 10 metres in front of a bike rider, especially when sometimes they can't get out of the way. The bike rider can actually go faster into a corner. It's a safety issue that needs to be addressed. I think that motorbikes should not be in front of bunches, especially late in finals as well. I've seen a couple of races over the last week with motorbike in front of a bunch sprint inside the K. That's a big safety issue. And the other one is it is having an effect on outcomes of races. It's as simple as that. There's no disputing it. And I just don't know why the UCI don't step up and make rules for the organisers to follow. I know that they're looking for a better television shot and all that jazz, but with the technology we've got now with overhead shots, drones, breakaways, the motorbike can always be behind a breakaway or on the side of a chase of a peloton. It doesn't have to be 5 to 10 metres in front. There's a thing called zoom on those cameras, and I'm sure they can get good shots and not influence the bike race.
Michael Matthews and Matt White there, being very upset about the idea of motorbikes in races helping people on breakaways. I mean, but this has always been around, hasn't it? And do you think Michael Matthews wouldn't have been jumping on the slipstream of a motorbike if he wasn't off the front of a race?
I mean, I think there are cases when you see so many motorbikes, you see it in all the classics, because, you know, you go from these big roads onto narrow roads, the crowds are very tight. In as we saw in the Poggio, it's a very, very tight space to get all the medium motorbikes out of the way. But, I mean, I guess the riders are so good now, they're so quick now when they descend, that they are able to take, even if it's a 2-3 second advantage. I mean, Moritz won that race by what, 2 seconds? So, you know, that may have been the motorbike drafting that he got on 2 bends. It was very clear on 2 bends that he was right on
yeah,
the
if you can't, if you're, I mean, I've seen it before, and I can't remember who was talking about it. It was a report. It was on the back of a motorbike. Basically, the motorbike pilot was saying, we can't go fast enough around the corners. The bikes are quicker out the corners. They're more agile. So what do you do then? What's the solution? I think
as Matt White was saying, you know, maybe you get drones, or maybe you use the helicopters, or maybe, you know, yeah, but you know, if you've, it's also dangerous, isn't it? Because if I've seen motorbikes go down, you can imagine if that had been a really slick Poggio. Well, he wouldn't have gone down so fast anyway, because he'd have been down the deck as well. But you know, the motorbikes can only go as fast.
There's another aspect to it as well.
The riders are quicker
unseen
through
a lot
these
of the
bends. They
time.
are quicker through these descents.
I was talking to Mark Cavendish about it last year, and he was saying one thing that when you're in the gruppetto on a mountain stage, he says you're sitting there in a big group of riders, and you're kind of all trying to maintain a steady pace up a climb, and then you kind of go hell for leather down the descents and try and ride as hard as you can in the valley. And he was saying there's so many bikes in front of the front group now that the gruppetto isn't making up time anymore. That you're basically having to race the whole stage flat out at like I think he gave some figure like. In his book that came out last year, he kind of mentioned that he would have ridden at, I don't know, 320 watts average up a climb when he first started racing, or maybe it might have been 280 actually, and now it's like 360 or 380 just to kind of get inside the time limit. And he's only getting in by a minute or two every day, and he said a lot of it's down to the fact that the motorbikes are just towing everybody along.
Well, what is the solution then? What is it? Do you take them out? I mean, I don't think anybody's going to be flying drones around in the near future. And you'd still have somebody close with the actual drone control if they were going to do that.
But it's a televised sport, and it looks great on TV. And you know, one of the reasons people love it is because you have such in-your-face. I mean, it's like having a motorbike on the pitch during the World Cup final, or whatever, or F1. You know, the motorbikes get so close; they get such amazing images. Not just the TV motorbikes as well, all the stills bikes as well, because there are many motorbikes. You've got to remember, on a race like San Remo and the Tour de France, there are so many motorbikes there for commissaires, judges, photographers, TV, etc., etc. There's and you know they do get in the way sometimes, but in general, I think part of the appeal of the sport is that it is so visceral, and I think if you did go to drones or helicopters, then I think I agree with you, OJ. You'd lose a lot. I think it's almost worth the risk. The riders would not like to hear that, but it's almost worth the risk of having the spectacle of the sport. But maybe they just need to. I mean, every now and then, if you talk to the photographers who work on the bikes, I don't know the TV crews. I know lots of stills photographers, and Pete will as well, who say, "Oh God, we got really hauled over the coals by the commissaires or the race organisation because we were too close, or we didn't get out of the way, or you know, they had a right go at us." And we've seen it all through the time I've been watching cycling. I remember on Alpe d'Huez years ago, the motorbikes being right in front of the riders, and people saying, "Well, that's just slipstreaming." So it's always been the way. Every now and then they get their knuckles wrapped and they back off, and then I guess, you know, they are like paparazzi, because that's what the idea comes from. You know, that filming stuff on a motorbike, they want to be as close as they can. They want to see the whites of the rider's eyes, and in some ways, you know, when you look at how spectacular that race was on Saturday, you know, we owe them a debt of thanks in some ways, as well as, you know, get out of the way, guys, but you know, keep bringing us those great pictures.
Yeah. I guess it's one of those, isn't it? With all of these arguments and all the different sports I've worked on over the years, there'll always be a hardcore crew of people that comes from fans as well as from people who take part in the sport. MMA was bad for it, where they were like, "Oh, I hate the fact that the media's involved in this. I hate the fact that we have to do interviews. I hate the fact that you're filming me. I just want to fight. I just want to ride my bike." Okay, fine, but you're going to get paid nothing. It's going to be an amateur sport because there'll be no coverage and no one will care. Let's talk about Slovenia. They now rule the two-wheeled world. 5 World Tour races have happened so far this year, and Slovenians through Pogačar and Primož Roglič and Mohoric now have won 4 of them. That's 4 out of 5. How can this be, Pete? I mean, how can we explain such dominance? Because it is now dominance.
It's just extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, I don't think there's any one reason for it. It's just, it's coincidence as much as anything. I mean, Slovenia's always had a strong cycling tradition. It borders on Italy, and I think there's obviously been a crossover between riders from Slovenia racing for Italian teams. And it's just coincidence that they've got the 2 strongest stage racers in the world at the moment, in Roglič and Mohoric. They've got, in Roglič and Pogačar rather, they've got Mohoric, who's obviously a great rider in a breakaway. And they've got 3 or 4 more riders who are really strong as well. Jan Palank was riding incredibly strongly in I think was it on the Cipressa that he led the race up the Cipressa, setting the pace for Pogačar. So they've got a lot of good riders, but it's just, I don't think there's been no investment or anything. It's not like British cycling putting a load of cash into cycling in the UK back in 2008 or whatever, and that's suddenly producing a lot of golds at the Olympics. It's just a fluke, I guess.
How many Slovenians do you think there are? I've just looked it up. How many Slovenians do you think there are?
What, the population?
Yeah.
2 million.
2.1 million. Which is crazy to see how dominant they are. Do you think we'll see it through the rest of this year, Jeremy? I mean, as you say, 4 out of 5 World Tour races won by Slovenians. I mean, it's going to be at least the Tour de France, we would guess, at least one more big Grand Tour.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? And with that will come some stage wins as well. And inevitably there'll be, Roglic will win a Grand Tour as well, because he always does win a Grand Tour now. So I'd have thought if he doesn't win the Tour de France, he'll which I think actually he might win the Tour de France this year. I don't know why. I've just got a feeling that he, if he's going to do it, it's maybe now or never. If he doesn't win the Tour, then he'll probably win the Vuelta. But yeah, it's very, very striking, isn't it, how dominant they are. It's kind of unnerving for people who kind of like, get a bit of a funny feeling when one nation is really dominant, because of, cycling's history and stuff. But at the same time, it's like you just look at the other riders and you think, well, maybe they have to come up with some new tactics. I don't know what new tactics you can come up against with a force of nature that is Pogačar, because it seems to me like there isn't anybody who's got the physical resources that he's got. I think with Roglic, we've seen before that in the right circumstances he can be put on the ropes, and then people can overthrow him. Pogačar just doesn't feel possible, and it's extraordinary that the performance in Tirreno Adriatico was just off the scale, I thought.
It was, wasn't it? I love that trident. So what you're basically saying is that Sir Dave Brailsford needs to get in his camper van and take himself off to Lake Bled in Slovenia and maybe look out for the local talent. Is that what he needs to do?
Lake Bled?
Yeah, I've just Googled it and I couldn't pronounce the capital. So I thought I'd go for the closest thing I could find. Okay.
Ljubljana,
there you go. Thank you very much. You know me and a pronunciation. That's not my favourite thing. Finally, as well as San Remo, it's been a very busy weekend of racing elsewhere, with the Alfredo Binda Trophy World Tour race won by world champion Elisa Balsamo, who took her second big win of 2022. A fast finish in a race that was impacted by a road traffic accident, while in Western France, journeyman sprinter Marc Sourou took a big win in the French Cup race. Cholet Pays de Loire. How was that, Pete?
That was very good.
Thank you. One more achievement just to round off, because Lachlan Morton has made a bit of a habit of this, of doing things which are away from the usual cycling world, and people of course, have gone to him because the ultra-long-distance ride by Lachlan Morton, who rode over 1,000 kilometres non-stop from Munich to the Ukraine border to raise money for refugee and war relief in Ukraine. If you want to know how far he is, I actually looked it up while we're recording this. So he's not actually finished it so far. I think he is 900. Here we go. He is 952 kilometres in the south, 1,063. If you want to support him, you can do efprocycling.com/culture/one ride away. Well, let's just end on this. If we're talking about Lachlan Morton and what he's raising money for, Jeremy, the war in Ukraine, it is something that's taking a lot of focus from everyone. Cycling is a global sport. How much has cycling had to deal with this so far?
Well, I think cycling's not done enough compared with other sports. It's the bubble thing is so strong in cycling, that it kind of exists in a vacuum. We've seen a few gestures. We've seen some riders. Pavel Sivakov from Ineos Grenadiers, who was Russian born but born in France. Well, he's lived all over Europe really, but he's basically has French nationality now. He's changed to French nationality. Alexander Vlasov, who's Russians, come out against the invasion of Ukraine. Oleg Tinkov used to manage, is an oligarch and used to manage the Tinkov team of Alberto Contador. He's also spoken out against the war in Ukraine.
Oleg Tinkov, who is now not a billionaire anymore, he's lost 5 billion since the war started, spoke out against the special operation in Ukraine, which I think is important to point out, that he is not somebody who's used the word war.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, well, so there's been individual gestures, but collectively, and I mean, the UCI eventually said something, but collectively, I think it's been quite low key and quite disappointing. I think that more could have been done. They could have made more gestures at the start of races. They could have done something with the livery on the cars. They could have done something with the podium protocols and so on and so forth. There's countless opportunities for them to do stuff in support of Ukraine. So it's great that EF are doing this, and it's great that Lachlan Morton is doing it as well. I mean, I have a lot of respect for the guy because he realised that he didn't really fit within the peloton. I mean, he still races in the peloton. He's raced a few races this year, but his place is doing this kind of thing. I think it suits his personality, suits his riding style, suits his maverick nature as well. So, I think it's a great opportunity for him to use his sponsorship and the whole marketing that he has around that team to raise the profile of what's happening in Ukraine and to raise money and to just engage with people who follow cycling as well. Is any other team doing that? Not really. Is any other sponsor saying much about it? Not really. And I mean, maybe that's because they've got their own skeletons in the closet. If you look at some of the teams, like, obviously there are obviously examples: Bahrain, UAE, Ineos. Okay, Ineos isn't a despotic regime, but Ineos have been accused of Ineos as a sponsor have been accused of sports washing, using cycling for sports washing and other sports as well. The World Championships is going to Rwanda in 2025, which has a close relationship with Vladimir Putin. There's lots of uneasy stuff here, as there is in all sports. So maybe that's why people haven't wanted to talk about it too much, but they need to talk about it more, definitely.
Has cycling got to change, you think, over this year, considering what's happening and the human tragedy that's going on in Ukraine?
I think I think Jeremy's right. I mean, the crisis doesn't. I mean, there are a handful of Ukrainian and Russian riders in the peloton, and same in women's racing as well. But I mean, there aren't races there. There aren't any championships organised there, or there weren't before the war started. So it's kind of been easy for cycling not to do anything. And I think they do need to kind of, like everybody does, show support. I mean, whether it's, I can't remember which race it was. It might have been Paris-Nice, actually. I noticed they had little logos just on the screen at certain points, just saying, I don't know, soutien or Ukraine or something, just let's support Ukraine. And it's just stuff like that, basically, just so that we all know. I mean, we're all watching sport and we're all enjoying it, but let's not forget there's something awful going on somewhere that needs to be sorted out, basically.
I mean, I find it quite uneasy when I'm sitting watching these races through the most beautiful landscape, and you're caught up in the dreaminess of cycling, and you think, well, we're only what are we? How many kilometres? 1,500 kilometres away at times from a war zone where, you know, missiles are raining down on civilians, taking refuge in the basements of theatres, and, you know, on kids, on maternity hospitals. And we all know what's going on in Ukraine. And I don't think, if you can sit and just pretend it's not happening, watch the bike race or be involved in the bike race and not have an awareness of that, I think you need to think about that harder.
I think it's a strong point to end on, but it is one we have ended on. Thank you so much for listening to this Aérogramme from Peloton magazine. It's a wrap on the 2022 Primavera. Spring has definitely sprung in Europe. I know that for a few reasons. It looked beautiful watching the race. And secondly, I have shaved my legs. I did a ride outdoors and I shaved one leg, but I ran out of time. So I only had one shaved leg. We'll be back soon with more on the classic season as the Peloton heads to the cobbled roads of Belgium and northern France, kicking off with Ghent-Wevelgem on March the 27th. Thank you to Pete and to Jeremy as always. My name's OJ Borg. Thank you for listening.
This has been a Big Ring production for Peloton magazine. Peloton is an award-winning print and digital magazine available worldwide. Known for quality, design, long-form storytelling and historical features, in the past 11 years, Peloton has become the go-to cycling magazine for serious cycling fans and enthusiasts around the globe. Please visit pelotonmagazine.com to learn more about our membership options.